we left here in the part 1. So in the part 2 we'll be talking more about what Al-Biruni felt about India and Ibn Battuta, then Francois Bernier. So the topics are also covered in such a way that Al-Biruni and Ibn Battuta, then Francois Bernier. So first one is about Al-Biruni, right? So he is talking about the alien world to him because he was from another part. So he is talking about overcoming the barriers. So what were the barriers for understanding our nation or subcontinent is very much important here, and also about the caste system, how was it framed by the Brahmanas and all that. Next, coming to Ibn Battuta and the excitement of the unfamiliar. So in this, Ibn Battuta is very much excited about something which he was unfamiliar, that was coconut, pan and all that. And yeah, we also talk about the Indian cities. So Indian cities in particular, how was the communication and how were the bazaars and how were trade, agriculture is what we are going to look into. Next is Bernier and the degenerate East. So Bernier always compares Europe with India, and he also gives a very good rationalizing thing for Europe, but in India he is not so favorable for Indians, for the Mughal, particularly for the Mughal ownership of land or whatever. So he is giving us detailed things about the land ownership and also about the complex social reality. How was the social realities also he is talking about. Next, the three travelers give a generalized view on women, slaves, sati and laborers. How were they used and how were they treated for. Okay, coming to this one, first one is, as we know, it is about Al-Birunis. So basically overcoming the barriers to of understanding. So here the points are simple. There are about like 4 points only. So as we have seen, travelers, they often compare. So comparison is what most of the travelers did. See, so what they saw in the country, like for example, if they see something in India, so they used to compare it with other countries, say it Persia, because they were very much familiar with Persia, because he would have been from, he's from Uzbekistan, right? So he would have compared it with that place. Okay, so they also adopted different strategy or distinct strategy. Not everyone follow the same. And also talking about the barriers, this is an important thing. There are about 3 barriers which he mentions. So the first barrier is language, because according to him, Sanskrit was an alien language because it was very much different from Arabic and Persian, and that couldn't be easily translated also. So language in particular, he's saying about Sanskrit also. And also next one is about the religious practices. He wasn't able to understand most of the religious practices. And the third barrier was self-absorption and the consequent insularity of the local population. How did they see that? How did local population took the points? So that was also a very big barrier. So these are the 3 barriers. So this may be a little bit important. And yeah, coming to the next thing. So he was very much dependent on the Brahmanas' work, we can call it. So he took a lot of passages or sightings from Vedas and Puranas. So to name few, you can name a few, that is Manusmriti and Bhagavad Gita and Patanjali. So these were used to understand Indian society as a whole. So that is one thing. So let's see this as a revision point. So basically we'll see about the comparison and strategies is the first point, and next is about the barriers. So what were the 3 barriers? Next is how he framed what was Indian society was all about with Brahmana's work, and what are some of the work. You can give 2 to 3 examples on it. Next one is about Al-Biruni's description of the caste system. So what is caste system according to him? So you can see, as I said before, Persia, he was very much he was very much known about. It was something he would compare it with. So in Persia, you can see that he was comparing the caste system of Indian society with the Persian society, where there were 4 categories in Persia. So first one is about the ruling classes, that consist of knights and princes, and the next one is about monks and priests, that is about the religious purposes. First one is ruling people, next comes the religious people, then the professional ones like lawyer, doctors, astronomers and scientists. Next, finally, the last comes the peasants and artisans are taking other place. So there were like 4 categories. So whereas in India that was so that means that not only in India we had the caste system categories, but we also had that was also there in the Persia. So yeah, so he also compared it with the Islamic religion. So there they don't have any divisions, where they only have differences. So you would how you look upon God is what the difference is, but they didn't have something called division. So they were like almost equal, everyone were equal, considered equal. So he disapproved a thing that is of pollution. So pollution here means that there is a notion of pollution which is mentioned by the Brahmanas. So that means impurity. So impurity here means the lower caste people, so they wouldn't be able to participate socially with the upper caste people or the other classes, we can call it. So that was something which he strongly disapproved of, because according to him that was very much contradicting to the law of nature. So he also gives an example here, when sun cleanses the air and the salt prevents in the sea prevents the water from becoming polluted. So there is a need of something to make something away from being polluted. So that is contradicting to law of nature what the Brahmanas talked about. Okay. Next one is, we can see that he was very much influenced by the normative Sanskrit text. Normative here means it is something which has to be followed, like rules and regulation kind of things. So you can see the text, that is the normative Sanskrit text, would have been written in the point of Brahmanas or sometimes for the Brahmanas also. So it isn't going to be equal for all, right? So that is something which he disapproved, which he was influenced by, and yeah, he disapproved the pollution concept of pollution also. So but he said in reality the description, the normative Sanskrit text is not going to work, because there is a category called Yaja. So I've marked this because you may get in one mark question. So that means outside the system, that is the people who is not considered even the system, like untouchable people and all that. So the labor was really inexpensive. So the labor to peasants and zamindars, that was really important for economic networks, is what he mentioned. So real life they may have been socially excluded, but you cannot exclude them economically, is what our Al-Biruni mentioned. So yeah, so he's comparing it with Persia, the 4 categories. Next, he's comparing with Islam as a religion, and he's disapproving the caste system, that is the notion of pollution, and why it is contradicting to the laws of nature is also mentioned in these examples. And he's also describing he has his description has been very much influenced by the normative Sanskrit text, and how it is very much contradictory, even if it is mentioned in the normative text as something, but in reality they are being included. Their example you can give Antyajas. Okay, next traveler we talk about will be Ibn Battuta. So he is someone who is very much excited about what he saw as unfamiliar. So according to him, pan and coconut was something very much unfamiliar. Yeah, so let's get into the topic. So this is kind of introduction. So Ibn Battuta, we know he arrived in the 14th century. So he is arriving in Delhi, where Tughlaq was ruling. So then there was a very great network of communication, you can call it global network of communication also. So that was stretching from China, Africa, Europe, it was all covering all the regions, and Ibn Battuta himself traveled extensively through these lands. So he was visiting a lot of places from religious shrines, and because he was a Qazi, right, so he was able to enjoy the cosmopolitan culture of the urban centers. In the cosmopolitan culture, people spoke 3 languages at most, and some other languages also, and Arabic, Persian, Turkish. So they were able to give him a lot of ideas, information, anecdotes. So that consisted of about kings and ordinary men also. So kings were described both cruel and generous about, and also ordinary things he was unfamiliar was also he was able to get it. So that was pan and coconut. So some of the best example are these both only, because he always covered these in his writings or in his books, because these were very much unfamiliar to his audience, so he can grab the attention of the audience. So that is what is about. Okay, so now let's get into the points in total. So first thing, he arrived Delhi, what he saw, how he traveled. Next, the languages, how the languages helped him get a lot of ideas, and with that ideas he found what is unfamiliar and he highlighted in his writings. Okay, that is again pan and coconut. So coming to the next thing is Ibn Battuta and the Indian cities. So Ibn Battuta always saw Indian cities as something which has a lot of opportunities. So who has the drive, resource and skill, they would excel in this country. And yeah, the cities, you can see they were always populated and they were very much prosperous, and for exceptional reasons where sometimes there may be war, then the scenario will be different, but mostly they were crowded street with bright colorful market or bazaars. So the two examples which you can remember is going to be Delhi and Daulatabad, that is in Maharashtra. So Delhi was very prosperous and with lot of population, and Maharashtra, that is Daulatabad in Maharashtra, is no less compared to Delhi. Okay, so next we'll be talking about the bazaars. So bazaars were not only something somewhere where you go and do economic transaction, but socially and culturally also it was an hub. You can call it as a hub of social and economic activities. And yeah, so there were also places for public performance by the artists, and the towns that derived a significant portion of their wealth is always through the surplus of the villages. So these towns were flourishing because of the villages only. So the towns, so this is also there in the poem of English. Always, you know, the towns and cities, they would always be flourishing from the villages only, from the surplus that we get from the villages. And he's talking about the Indian agriculture, where the fertility of soil is so good, and because of that farmers are able to cultivate 2 crops per year. And also the network of trade and commerce. So trade and commerce is also so good. So that is we are having trade all over Asia. And that, yeah, talking about exports, you can see the merchants are able to export a lot of textiles, call it muslin, silk and all that. For example, fine muslin was very expensive, that they would only be worn by the nobles, and that was very costly because of it. Next one is the unique system of communication. So talking about communication, always these state that is the government, they wanted to encourage traders to come. So what is needed for some traders who's coming all around Asia, so they need some place to stay, right? So inns and guest house were really important, and that was well supplied. All the trade routes were consisting of inns and guest house. And the postal system was very great, that not only you have been able to send information, but you're able to dispatch goods that you have to send for a short period of time. So for example, when you have to send something from Sindh to Daulatabad, it would take like 50 days. And when there is something you have to report to the Sultan, that would just take 5 days. Okay, so yeah, we talked about the bazaars. So the bazaars, how were the bazaars, and about the agriculture, and about trade and commerce were also very much important, and how these were built. The cities were built according to the needs of trade and commerce was also what we saw. And yeah, cities, yeah, these were the points. How was it? And you can give the 2 examples of Delhi and Daulatabad, about the bazaar, how they were very much culturally involved, and about the Indian agriculture, then trade and commerce, both were flourishing and they were so good. And some example of how the importance of exports were there, and yeah, how traders were encouraged in the state, by the state. Okay, so and how the postal system was very great. So this may be also for 1 marks. Okay, so next, Bernier and the Degenerate East. So Bernier is comparing France with Mughal India. So that is in general Europe with Mughal India. So yeah, so he is from a different intellectual tradition. So something what he saw, he is always comparing and contrasting with what he saw in India with what he's been through in France. And yeah, so the Travels in Mughal India is the book he has written. So in that he is giving us a detailed observation, and he's discussing about the history of the Mughals with the universal framework. That is, he's comparing it with Europe. And yeah, he is talking about in his book he is comparing, right? So after that he is able to he's able to work on the model of binary opposition. So in binary opposition, what he does is, where India is presented as an inverse of Europe. So Europe is great and India is something inferior to the Western world, is what he says. And because of his works, he is able to influence the policy makers to take the right decision for Europe also. So coming to the question of land ownership, which he always emphasizes on, let's look into it. So he says there is a lack of private property. So there is always crown ownership of land, where Mughal is owning all the land and there is no private ownership. So this is very much disastrous, and this gives the consequence is very bad both economically and socially. So there is no long term investment because there is no private property. See, when I own something for private, that is my own property, that will go to the next generation. So for the next generation to go, I will make sure the land is good, fertile and all that, and the next generation, so we take care of the land and we do some investment for even for the long term, because the upcoming generation should make use of it. But there is a lack of private property. What happens? Why should I care? Because it's not going to go to the next generation, right? So we don't do that. So he says that in the West there are improving landlords in the Western Europe, but whereas in India there is the ruination of agriculture, where agriculture has been ruined and there is an excessive oppression of the peasantry, and there is a decline in living standard of all the people, because only the people who's being able to have the power or ruling class is able to live good. That is very small. The 1% of the people is only being able to good, and most of the people are impoverished only. There is an extension of Barnier's, how he described that undifferentiated masses of impoverished people is very much subjugated only by a small majority, that is just 1% of the very rich and the powerful ruling class. And he says clearly that there is no middle class, there is rich of rich, or sorry, that is richest of richest or poorest of the poor. So there is over rich or no, very much poor. So yeah, his book Travel in Mughal Empire is very much important. So coming to the criticism, he says that the Mughal Empire, the king was the king of the beggars and the barbarians. So that is what he calls. Why is he criticizing? Because the ownership, that is the crown ownership. So the one reason that is because of the crown ownership of land, but all the points cannot be taken by Francois Bernier. It's not clear because there are so many contradictory things. That is in Mughal official document, which is written by Abul Fazl. So he was the official chronicler of the Akbar reign. So he describes the land as revenue as the remunerations of sovereignty. So it's just the ruler claiming some protection that will be given on. That is like an exchange. When I give you protection, you have to pay me something in return, right? So it was like that. But however, this was actually not a rent or even a land tax, but it was just the tax on the crop. It was so simple. So we said, right, he was able to influence the policy makers and all that. So yeah, he was able to influence Montesquieu. So Montesquieu was a very great reformer, and he was able to give a lot of theories to us, and we are able to note that he enjoyed absolute authority over the subject, who were kept in the conditions of subjugated poverty, arguing that land belonged to the king and private property was non-existent. So with this point, Montesquieu was able to develop the idea of Oriental despotism. So next, talking about Karl Marx. So Karl Marx was in the 19th century. He argued that the surplus. So the surplus was appropriated by the state. It was taken by the state. Whereas according to Karl Marx, he usually says that it should be given, that it should be distributed to the people who work for. Okay. So that is what is the problem with Indian society is being said, and they're calling Indian society, that is agriculture, all as a stagnant system. And coming to the conditions of the untouchabilities and the zamindars, there was also considerable social and economic differentiation. The big zamindars who enjoyed the superior rights in the land, and the others, the untouchables, were always landless and they were poor. And they were in between. There were big peasant who was able to own the land, but for them also they were only able to produce barely for their subsistence and nothing more, as such as zamindars and all that. So coming to a more complex social reality, so when Bernier's preoccupation with projecting the Mughal state was very much obvious, that he didn't want to project projected very great. His description occasionally hint in complex social reality. For example, he felt that artisans were given no incentive to improve the quality of their manufacturers, since all the profit, so according to him, all the profits were taken by the state is what he calls. Okay, so as manufacturers were exported in gold and silver, and he's also talking about the manufacturings were always in decline. So the artisans were in decline, manufacturers were in decline, and sometimes the merchants who were very much prosperous, they were only able to do the long distance trade and they were able to be prosperous. And yeah, 15% of the population, 15% of the population lived in the towns. Okay, so that is what he calls. And yeah, so these towns were also called as camp towns. So camp towns is because there were imperial camps. Why? Because all the profits were subjugated by the state, so because of that fact. And yeah, talking about the towns, as in the case, there were what were the kinds of the towns? Let's look into. There were manufacturing towns, there were trading towns, port towns, sacred centers, pilgrim towns, and all that. And yeah, so, and next, talking about the merchant as a community, how merchants evolved themselves as the unions, as we call, they were able to gather together as the community. So the occupational bodies in Western India, these groups were called as Mahajans, and their chief. So Mahajans is something, the group. Okay, the groups were called as Mahajans, and they have a head, so they were called as Seth. Okay, in the urban centers, for example, Ahmedabad, the Mahajans, that is the group, they were collectively represented by the chief of the merchant community. So they were called as Nagar Seth. Okay, Nagar Seth. In urban groups, included, like in the urban groups, you can see there were professional classes there. So for example, vakils or physicians, lawyers, that is vakils and lawyers are same, right? Painters, architects, musicians, calligraphers, and all that. So some were also dependent on the imperial patronage. So they were able to get work from the imperial household. So next, talking about women slaves and laborers, yeah, so these were all a generalized view given by all the travelers. So generally men only wrote accounts, so they didn't take the social inequalities as something abnormal. See, they took it like something it happens, so that was taken as normal. For instance, slaves were openly sold in the market like other commodities. That was very much normal for these travelers. So for example, when Ibn Battuta, when he reached Sindh, he purchased a lot of things for Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and there he purchased slaves also. Okay, so there when he reached Multan, he presented the governor with a slave and horse with raisins and almonds. And yeah, again there was a preacher called Nasruddin. So Muhammad Tughlaq gives Nasruddin 100,000 tankas. So tankas means coins, remember this, and he gave like about 200 slaves, which is so much. Okay, so Tughlaq is giving Nasruddin. So next one is about female slaves. What happened was they were participating in both music and dance, and they were also able to do the domestic labor, but their payment was very much low. And next was the slaves. They were generally used for the domestic purpose, as we saw, and they were able to do some indispensable work like of carrying the planquins or dola, is the same. And yeah, the pay was very low, and the treatment was very much different as you compare it. So the European travels is also said that the treatment which with the West and in India is going to be really different, and Western and the Eastern societies. And Bernier is talking about something very important, that is sati. He noted some women they don't want to die, whereas someone embraced death. Okay, so obviously who would like to die, right? So but some people also embraced death, but some people they were forced to die. So the next one was how also able to do these activities, and sometimes they would have put into private space.